Jehovah's Witnesses have spent decades saying they do not tithe. They do not officially require members to give 10% of their income. They do not pass collection plates, and they have often used this as proof that their organization is different from churches that openly ask members for money. But a leaked internal letter dated August 2026 is raising a very uncomfortable question. If Jehovah's Witnesses do not have a tithe, why is the branch office assigning a monthly amount based directly on the number of publishers in each congregation? The document explains a system in which a suggested monthly amount per publisher is provided by the branch. The elders then multiply that amount by the number of active publishers in the congregation, and that number becomes the basis for a monthly resolution for the worldwide work. And what makes this even more controversial is that the new guidance says that, in general, the congregation's monthly resolution should be equal to or greater than the amount recommended by the branch. So today, we are going to examine what this letter actually says, how this system works, and why many former Jehovah's Witnesses are already asking whether the organization has created something that looks increasingly like a monthly tithe without ever using that word. Before we continue, if you appreciate videos that examine the things Jehovah's Witnesses are rarely encouraged to question openly, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps this content reach more former witnesses, questioning witnesses, and people trying to understand what is happening behind the organizational language. Now let's look at the letter. Part 1. A monthly amount for every publisher. The August 2026 document is titled Announcements and Reminders, and part of it contains instructions specifically directed to elders. One section deals with the resolved monthly donation for the worldwide work, and this is where things become very interesting. The branch provides what is described as a suggested monthly amount per publisher, and the elders are instructed to multiply that number by the number of active publishers in the congregation. That means the amount expected from a congregation is directly tied to how many Jehovah's Witnesses are active there. If a congregation has 50 publishers, there is one calculation. If it has 100 publishers, the amount doubles. If it has 200 publishers, the amount increases again. Every active publisher effectively adds another unit to the monthly financial expectation. Reports connected with the 2026 instructions in the United States indicate a figure of approximately $11.50 per publisher per month. So imagine a congregation with 150 active publishers. At $11.50 each, the suggested monthly amount would be $1,725. Over 12 months, that becomes more than $20,000. Now we need to be precise. The letter does not say that an elder must approach every individual publisher and collect $11.50 from that person. There is no personal invoice and no official individual account showing who has paid and who has not. But the fact remains that the congregation's financial target is calculated using a specific amount attached to each active publisher. And that raises the obvious question. If there is supposedly no specific amount connected to an individual Jehovah's Witness, why is the congregation's expected donation calculated according to a specific amount per publisher? This is where the word tithe starts appearing in the conversation. It is not a traditional 10% tithe based on income, but it is a standardized financial expectation connected directly to the number of members. The organization can call it a suggested donation, a resolution, or support for the worldwide work, but the mathematical structure is still the same. Amount per publisher multiplied by the number of publishers every month. And here is what makes that especially difficult for former witnesses to accept. For decades, Jehovah's Witnesses were taught to look at other religions and criticize them for asking members for money. They criticized collection plates, televised fundraising, mandatory tithes, and churches that expected regular contributions. Many witnesses were proud to say, "We do not do that." But now, behind the scenes, elders are being given a financial amount that grows according to the number of people in the congregation. The terminology may be different, but the financial pressure is becoming harder to ignore. Part 2. When voluntary starts to feel like a quota. The most important thing to understand is that the general system of calculating a donation per publisher is not completely new. Similar instructions have appeared in previous years, so it would be inaccurate to say that Jehovah's Witnesses suddenly invented this entire mechanism in 2026. What appears more significant is the wording surrounding the expectation this year. The August 2026 instructions indicate that, in general, the monthly resolution should be equal to or greater than the amount recommended by the branch office. That language matters because the word suggested starts to become difficult to reconcile with an instruction saying the congregation should generally meet or exceed the recommended amount. Think about that logically. Imagine someone saying to you, "Your donation is completely voluntary. We suggest $100, but generally the amount should be at least $100. Technically, they can still use the word voluntary, but the expectation is obvious. This is especially relevant inside Jehovah's Witness culture because former members know that pressure does not always come through direct commands. You were rarely physically forced to go in field service, but there was an expectation. You were rarely physically forced to comment at meetings, but there was an expectation. You were rarely physically forced to volunteer, but there was an expectation. And when expectations are connected to spirituality, loyalty, and approval, they can become incredibly powerful even without an explicit threat. The letter also discusses what should happen when contributions are not sufficient. Elders are encouraged to help publishers appreciate the importance of supporting kingdom interests financially. And families are reminded to teach children that donating is part of worship. This is where the issue becomes even more sensitive, because financial giving is no longer presented merely as paying for electricity or maintaining a building. It becomes connected to a person's worship of Jehovah. Think about an elderly sister on a limited income hearing repeated reminders that giving money is part of her worship. Think about parents being encouraged to teach their children to contribute. Think about elders knowing exactly what amount the congregation is expected to reach based on the number of publishers. Is there an official individual bill? No. But does that mean there is no pressure? Former witnesses know the answer to that question better than anyone. And this is where the hypocrisy becomes difficult to ignore. Jehovah's Witnesses have spent years criticizing other religions for using guilt, obligation, and spirituality to encourage financial giving. But if your own organization assigns a monthly amount based on membership, tells elders the congregation should generally meet or exceed that amount, and connects donating with worship, how different is the underlying mechanism really? The name may be different, the language may be softer, but the expectation is still there. The public message versus what elders are told. This is where the leaked letter becomes most damaging. Publicly, Jehovah's Witnesses continue to say that members are not required to tithe and are not expected to donate a specific percentage of their income. Technically, that statement remains true. There is no formal 10% rule and no individual invoice mailed to every publisher. But internally, the branch establishes a recommended amount per publisher. The elders multiply that by the number of active publishers. And the congregation adopts a monthly resolution based on that calculation. The new guidance also indicates that, in general, that resolution should be equal to or greater than the amount recommended by the branch. Both statements can technically exist at the same time, but the difference begins to look increasingly artificial. The organization can say, no individual member is required to pay a specific amount, while simultaneously telling local elders, you have 120 publishers, so here is the amount your congregation should generally be sending every month. But who supplies that money? The branch does not generate it. The elders do not generate it. The Kingdom Hall does not generate it. The money comes from the publishers, and those publishers are already giving enormous amounts of unpaid labor. They preach without salaries. They clean Kingdom Halls. They perform congregation assignments. They help with construction and maintenance. Some organize their education, careers, and entire lives around the priorities of the organization. Many former members sacrificed opportunities because they were told to keep life simple and put kingdom interest first. Then, after receiving all of that unpaid labor, the organization can still look at the number of publishers in a congregation and calculate a monthly financial amount based on those same people. That is why this issue creates anger among former Jehovah's Witnesses. It is not simply about $11.50. It is about the contradiction between the image the organization has promoted for decades and the financial structure revealed by its own internal instructions. And there is another question worth asking. If another church used this exact system, how would Jehovah's Witness publications describe it? Imagine a church saying, we absolutely do not tithe, but headquarters gives every congregation a recommended amount per member. You multiply it by membership, create a monthly resolution, and generally the resolution should not be lower than headquarters recommends. Would Jehovah's Witnesses look at that system and say, that is completely voluntary? Or would they describe it as organized financial pressure? Because sometimes the easiest way to see a contradiction is to imagine the same policy being used by the religion you spent years criticizing. So, have Jehovah's Witnesses officially introduced a traditional tithe? No, There is still no rule requiring every member to give 10% of their income, and there is still no official individual invoice telling each publisher exactly what he or she must pay. But that does not make this letter insignificant. The August 2026 instructions show a system where the branch establishes a recommended monthly amount per publisher. That amount is multiplied by the number of active publishers, and the congregation creates a monthly resolution based on that calculation. The guidance then says that, in general, the resolution should be equal to or greater than the amount recommended by the branch. At what point does a suggested donation become a financial expectation? At what point does an amount calculated per publisher begin functioning like a monthly quota, even if nobody wants to use that word? And why does an organization that spent decades proudly saying, "We do not tithe," now need a system where financial expectations are calculated by counting the number of publishers in each congregation? For former Jehovah's Witnesses watching this, I want to hear your experience. When you were inside the organization, did you know that there was a recommended amount calculated per publisher? Did your congregation ever announce a specific monthly resolution? And did you ever feel financial pressure, even while being told that donations were completely voluntary? Leave your experience in the comments, because sometimes the most revealing part of a leaked letter is not simply what it says. It is the difference between what ordinary members are told publicly and what elders are instructed to do behind the scenes.